In war, the line between a hero and a traitor is often drawn in the dirt, written in blood, and decided by men staring through the cold glass of a rifle scope. They called Sergeant Kael Vorn a traitor. They stripped his name from the commendation lists. They marked him for death on a hill of ash. But what the men staring through those crosshairs didn't know, what command didn't know, was that the man standing under the enemy's flag was the only reason they were still breathing. 40-8 hours earlier. The sky over Raverin Ridge wasn't blue. It was a bruised, toxic grey. Sergeant Kael Vorn, his face smeared with soot and dried blood, dragged a wounded man behind the shattered remains of a brutalist concrete barricade. Second unit was pinned down. Machine gun fire ripped through the air like tearing metal. Captain Idris Vale's voice crackled frantically through Kael's earpiece, barely audible over the deafening roar of combat. Vorn, do you copy? Second unit, you have to hold that ridge. If they take the high ground, the valley falls. Reinforcements are 12 minutes out. I repeat, hold the line for 12 minutes. Kael dropped the radio receiver. He looked at his men. They were battered, bleeding, and running out of ammunition. Corporal Miko Arden, a younger soldier with a panicked but determined look, slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle and slid into the mud next to Kael. He was breathing heavy, but forced a grim, terrified smile. 12 minutes. Sergeant, we don't have 12 seconds of ammo left. But hey, if we make it out of this meat grinder, the first round of drinks is on you. Kael didn't look away from the tree line where the muzzle flashes were multiplying. He checked his sidearm. Survived the next 12 minutes, Arden and I'll buy the whole bar. Suddenly, a high-pitched, terrifying whistle descended from the sky. Kael's eyes widened. He lunged toward Miko, screaming for him to get down. An artillery shell struck their right flank. The world went white. Dirt, shattered concrete, and bodies were thrown into the air. Kael was thrown backward, his helmet flying off. He hit the ground hard. His vision faded to black as dark boots stepped over him, back in the present timeline. Inside a pristine, heavily fortified forward operating base, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Captain Vale stood frozen, his hands planted firmly on a metal tactical table, staring at a bank of high-resolution monitors. In the command center, silence fell like a physical weight. The men in this room had spent the last 48 hours mourning the complete loss of second unit. But the ghosts of Raverin Ridge were moving. High above the ridge, a reconnaissance drone circled silently. The footage was crystal clear. It was Kael. He wasn't dead. He wasn't bound. He was walking calmly, shoulder to shoulder with the enemy infantry. He was wearing their dark, heavy trench coats. An officer whispered in horror that Vorn had surrendered. Vale's voice was cold, deep in denial. No, not Kael. I've known him for 6 years. He'd bite down on a grenade before he put on that uniform. But the drone's optical sensor didn't lie. Kael stepped up to the highest point of the ridge, the exact spot where his men died defending the line. He was handed a thick wooden pole by an enemy lieutenant. Kael gripped the red enemy banner with a powerful thrust. He drove the flagpole deep into the muddy soil of Raverin Ridge. Radio static broke the absolute silence of the room. A sniper team locked onto Kael's chest, requesting authorization to terminate the traitor. Vale stared at the screen. He looked at the flag flapping in the wind. His jaw tightened. He closed his eyes and whispered the order. Authorize. Take the shot. But 48 hours earlier, a very different story had unfolded. Kael had woken up, tied to an iron chair in the damp, freezing basement of a ruined transport depot. Stepping out of the shadows was enemy commander Korvan. Korvan was immaculately dressed, terrifyingly calm, and holding a lit cigarette. Sergeant Vorn, Korvan said, studying him. You fought fiercely. Your men, they trusted you implicitly. It is a tragedy they died for a command that was never going to save them. Kael stayed dead silent. Korvan gestured toward the ceiling, where the muffled thud of distant artillery could be heard. He explained that tomorrow morning they would end the war in this sector. They had 3 heavy artillery nests dug into the eastern slopes. When Kael's reinforcements pushed through the valley corridor, they wouldn't just be stopped. They would be erased. 5,000 men gone in 20 minutes. Korvan leaned in close. I don't need to torture you, Sergeant. I just need you to look out that window. Through the shattered glass, in the courtyard outside, hundreds of civilians were being herded behind barbed wire. Kael didn't just see soldiers. He saw families, children, the elderly. The enemy wasn't just planning an ambush. They had packed the valley corridor with a human shield. When the artillery rained down, it wouldn't just be a military defeat. It would be a massacre. You have 2 choices, Vorn, Korvan whispered. You can die right now, tied to this chair, completely useless. Or you can put on our uniform, feed us the patrol codes we know you have, and live long enough for your life to matter. That night, sitting in the pitch black, listening to the cries of children in the courtyard, Kael made his choice. The next morning, he knelt before Korvan and agreed to help. When Korvan asked why, Kael delivered a perfectly calculated lie, his voice dripping with bitter hatred. Because Vale told us reinforcements were 12 minutes away. They never came. My men bled out in the mud for a lie. I owe them nothing. And just like that, the infiltration began. Kael became a ghost inside the machine. He had to give them enough to prove his loyalty, but not enough to hurt his own side. He fed them outdated grid coordinates. He joined their patrols. He memorized the weaknesses in their armor, counted the supply trucks, and noted the exact placement of the 3 hidden artillery nests. He found their weak fuel storage, but knowing the coordinates was useless. He had no radio, no flares, no way to tell command. He was surrounded by wolves. One wrong look, one slip of the tongue, and he would face a firing squad. He needed a beacon. He needed something large enough for a surveillance drone to see from 10,000 feet, which brought him back to the ridge, back to the sniper's crosshairs. Wind speed is 10 knots. Distance is 1,200 meters. Breathing controlled. I have a clear shot, the sniper reported over the radio. Vale's hand hovered over the comms button. But down on the ridge, Kael didn't step away from the flagpole. Instead of planting it and leaving, Kael grabbed the heavy wooden base. He wrestles it out of the dirt. He dragged the pole 3 paces to the left. He checked his watch. He looked at the sun. He adjusted the angle of the pole, tilting it exactly 45 degrees. He drove it back into the earth. Then he took exactly 3 paces east, dropped to one knee, and bowed his head. Inside the command center, the door violently banged open. Corporal Mikko Arden, battered, his arm in a sling from the ridge battle, burst into the room. Wait. Stop. Don't shoot. Zoom the drone in on the shadow. Vale ordered the feed enhanced. The image pixelated slightly, then sharpened. The sun was hitting the tilted flagpole, casting a long, perfectly straight, dark shadow across the topological map of the ridge. Miko pointed a trembling, dirt-stained finger at the monitor. That wasn't random. The shadow of the pole sliced directly across 3 specific grid quadrants on the digital map overlay. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. Kael wasn't surrendering. The shadow was a laser pointer. He was painting the targets. He was giving them the exact coordinates of artillery position Alpha, the fuel depot near Ridge 6, and the main ambush corridor. Vale didn't hesitate. He instantly redirected the long-range artillery batteries. Coordinates were verified. Firing solutions locked down in the enemy camp. Corvin stood on a balcony, watching Kael on the ridge. Suddenly, the sky above them tore open. Explosions erupted across the enemy lines. One hidden artillery nest detonated, throwing fire and steel into the sky. Then another. The massive fuel storage tanks ignited in a blinding chain reaction that shook the earth. Corvin watched his entire trap turn to ash in seconds. He turned slowly toward the ridge. The realization washed over his face. He screamed for his guards. The ruse was over. Guards seized Kael instantly, dragging him down from the ridge and into the central square of the enemy's burning stronghold. Corvin stood before him, his face twisted in rage. He addressed his panicked troops, pointing a shaking hand at Kael. He fought beside us while killing us. Kael stood there, battered, his uniform torn, but completely upright. Corvin pressed the cold steel of a pistol directly to Kael's forehead. "You could have lived," Corvin hissed. Kael looked him dead in the eye and answered quietly, "I was always living." Corvin's finger tightened on the trigger, but suddenly a deafening whistle filled the air. Kael's coded message had included one more piece of vital information: the exact location of the enemy command square. Massive bombardment struck the stronghold perimeter. The ground shattered. Smoke and pulverized stone flooded the square, blinding everyone. Enemy troops scattered in absolute panic. Through the thick, choking haze, the sound of heavy boots and tactical gunfire echoed. Friendly forces were breaching the compound walls. Leading the charge, firing his rifle one-handed, was Corporal Miko Arden. He burst through the smoke, tackling the guard holding Kael to the ground. Close quarters combat erupted everywhere. Vale's reinforcements swept through the corridors, clearing room by room. Corvin attempted to scramble away in the chaos. Kael, barely conscious, his ears ringing from the blasts, reached into the dirt and grabbed a fallen rifle. He racked the bolt, aimed through the smoke, and fired once. Corvin fell, and then there was only silence. Hours later, the sun began to set. Raverin Ridge had been reclaimed. This time, under the correct flag, Kael sat on a wooden medical crate, his arm heavily bandaged, staring out at the smoking horizon. Miko walked up and sat down in the dirt beside him, shaking his head. "You idiot. We almost shot you." Kael smiled faintly, not taking his eyes off the horizon. "You almost did." Captain Vale approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. He pulled off his tactical gloves and looked down at his sergeant. "I authorized the sniper," Vale said, his voice thick with regret. Kael simply nodded. "I know." A long pause stretched between the 3 men. Vale looked up at the reclaimed ridge, where their own nation's banner was now flying proud against the orange sky. "You saved more than soldiers today," Vorn Vale said softly. Kael watched the wind lift the fabric of the flag. He took a slow, deep breath. "For a while, I had to fight under theirs. History will record that Ravrin Ridge was defended. The archives will list the artillery strikes, the casualty counts, and the tactical victories. But the official records will never tell the whole truth. They will never record the moment a lone soldier stood under the enemy's flag, risking everything so that thousands of others could stand under their own.